What, if anything, should we read into Kuznetsov being scratched?
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms, including the SiriusXM app and on YouTube. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. And the best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. I would love to talk Caps hockey with you one-on-one, and we can do that on subtext. Just check the show description for more details. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the big news that Evgeny Kuznetsov was a healthy scratch this evening as the Capitals take on the Coyotes. What, if anything, should we read into that? A little bit later, we will talk about potential trade partners for Evgeny Kuznetsov. This emanates from the 32 Thoughts podcast, talking about interest potentially in Evgeny Kuznetsov. And then to close out the show, I will talk about one of the biggest names being circulated, and that is Patrick Laine, in a potential trade partner between Columbus and the Capitals. Is there anything to that? And would he ultimately be a good option? But just to get it going here, we will talk about how Kuzy was a scratch tonight. And if you're an everydayer of the show, you know I spoke about in yesterday's show about the potential of Evgeny Kuznetsov, getting scratched or being on the third line, being on the fourth line. What did it all mean after he was benched in the previous game against the Golden Knights? And is this the right tactic to take with a guy like Evgeny Kuznetsov? Now, let's just take a look at this, kind of widen the lens here a little bit. What happened last year with Peter Laviolette when he was underutilized, when Kuznetsov was misused and underutilized? He reached out to Russian media saying that I want out of DC. I don't want to be here, at least two different times that we're aware of. So benching him or making him a healthy scratch, do you think that that is the kind of thing that is going to change Evgeny Kuznetsov, or do you think it's going to just make him more bitter, or do you think it's just going to, fuel his need to talk to Russian media or whoever that he wants to be out of DC? I don't think this is going to help the case. I ultimately understand why Spencer Carbery had to do what he had to do for the better good of the Capitals, because this is not Kuznetsov's Capitals. This is the Washington Capitals. But it's one of those things that you have to kind of tap dance on landmines, because if you do the wrong thing, all of a sudden you've lost a player for the year. And if we can find a trade partner for Kuznetsov, you have limited options. Are you going to bench a guy, make him a healthy scratch for the remainder of the season, considering how much they're paying him? Are you going to play him on the third or fourth line, having him sulk and just eat up minutes, even though he's not worth anything? So it is a bit of a precarious position for the Capitals to be in about how to handle Evgeny Kuznetsov tactfully. Ultimately, I think they've given him his opportunity. And again, I would love nothing more than for him to turn things around and find his way back with the Capitals and just get him going. But as long as he has been a Capital, it's been a bumpy ride. 1 minute, he's one of the best players in the NHL. The next minute, he's just totally out of it. A quirky guy, one of the guys who said that I could be one of the best players in the NHL if I chose to be. I just don't choose to be. So an interesting guy for the Capitals. And ultimately, you take a look at the game tonight. Again, I'll have complete game breakdown for you guys tomorrow, as it is another late game tonight. But it'll be interesting to see what happens. And ultimately, when Kuznetsov gets inserted, back into the lineup. And a little bit later in the show, I'll talk to you about trade options. Is it really about this mental reset that Spencer Carbery is talking about, or are we setting him aside because a trade is imminent? It's something to think about. Quite exciting times for the Capitals, as change could be afoot. One of the things that GM Brian McClellan said is that he wanted to address the top six and add a top six scoring forward. Is there a name that could help bolster this team? The last time he was a healthy scratch was on May 3rd, 2021, when Laviolette sat him and Ilya Samsonov out for disciplinary reasons. That was the last time. And if memory serves, that had something to do with a big party with some of the Russians on the team during COVID, and they were, in each other's hotel rooms. And if memory serves, that's what it's about. And also, we know that Evgeny Kuznetsov has had some personal issues that I don't really need to get into, but he's had some personal issues in his free time. But what does that mean now that Kuzy's out of the lineup? Again, one man's loss is another man's gain. This is the opportunity for Hendrix Lapierre and Matthew Phillips to show what they have. Matthew Phillips is the guy that we heard about in the preseason that, he's going to set this team on fire. Hasn't really done that. He possesses some intangibles. He can do some things. He's a good playmaker, but ultimately has not found the back of the net with any type of regularity there. Kuznetsov, it's an interesting thing being the fact that they are benching him as he leads all forwards in ice time this season and ranks 10th among NHL forwards in that department. So isn't that interesting? A guy that got very limited time in this last game and was subsequently a healthy scratch tonight, was ranked number 10th in the NHL in time on ice. And I guess you could look at it in the regard that if it's misused time, it doesn't really matter if he's playing the entirety of a game. If he's not, contributing the way that he should be, it's really for naught. So what did Spencer Carbery say about all this? I'm pontificating. I'm kind of throwing it at the wall and seeing if it sticks here. But what did he have to say? He says it's just a mental reset for him. Carbery told reporters in Tempe he's just been struggling of late to find his game. We've talked to him. We've looked at some different stuff, and I think it's a good opportunity for him to take a step back, reset mentally, and focus on getting his game back to where it's capable of being. Again, sometimes I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Can't we meet somewhere in the middle? I think that ultimately it could potentially be that. I think there's some frustration with Spencer Carbery. I did see him mouth some four-letter words under his breath when he was on caused a penalty. So I think there's frustration with Spencer Carbery, of course, with his lack of play, with his inability to step up. You take a look at Anthony Mantha. He was kind of in the doghouse with Spencer Carbery, rose to the challenge, and is now one of the top contributors on the team. So it's an interesting position. Or is it, like I said, the potential that there's a trade imminent? He totaled a season low of 15-20 in the last game. So that's interesting. You could tell that something was off. I think that they flailed, they tried everything. They put it in the blender, they shook it up, and they just could not find any chemistry. Kuznetsov, however, did take part in the team's optional skate at the illustrious, fancy Mullet Arena. I think it holds something like 5,000 fans. But in any event, we're hoping that Kuznetsov can find his way. So a mental reset, that's an interesting thing, a mental reset. Or is it one of those things where you need to sit down and think about what you did? I think that is more what it's about. Through 19 games so far, Kuzy has just 9 points, including 1 in his last 6 games. So I understand ultimately why it was done. We don't want to put a guy out on the ice that is not going to contribute. I have to be a man of my word. I always say this on this show, is that this isn't, a particular team catered to Kuznetsov or whatever player. This is a team, the Washington Capitals, and they want the best players out on the ice that's going to give them the best chance at winning. Oftentimes you hear me talk about the netminder. The same holds true here with Kuznetsov. It's just that I hope they have kind of an end game in mind for Kuzy. Say there isn't a trade partner. This would have been Kuzy's 700th game. So kind of, a dig sort of at him to a certain extent, understanding the gravity of the situation that it would have been his 700th game. So ultimately, what put him in the doghouse in the first place? It was a roughing penalty. And he struggled to find chemistry with any of his line mates. You saw him with Wilson. You saw him with Ovechkin. And after that penalty, he was on the ice only two more times and then benched. He got, dropped down from the second line, third line, fourth line, went all the way down, and then that was it. Sat out the near 6 minutes of regulation, including when the Capitals were on the PP. So he was definitely, Spencer Carbery is trying to send a message, and I think that that's all you can do. I mean, I'm sure that he's had words with him saying, you need to work on this, you need to work on that. But Kuzy is that kind of odd duck, if you will. And I think that, sometimes things just have a hard time getting through with him. And then talking about the line between Wilson and Ovechkin, that Kuzy had a hard time, creating chemistry with him, and that the analytics didn't look really good on that line. And that's what everything is about nowadays, isn't it? Analytics, what's working here, what's working there. And if it isn't working at the end of the day, you got to change things because, again, at the end of the day, the Capitals want to win games, and it doesn't really matter who's in the lineup. The best possible players is who you want to have in the game. And ultimately, that was a tough decision, I'm guessing, for Spencer Carbery. But again, you could see the frustration on his face as Kuzy was not living up to potential and what he should be. All right, so coming up here after the break, it does get a lot more interesting as there is trade chatter surrounding Evgeny Kuznetsov and the Capitals and the Blue Jackets. Is there any smoke to that fire? I'll talk about that coming up. When you're drafting your fantasy team, do you ever wish you could do the same thing with your business team? If you're building a roster to win the league, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Don't spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills when you can do it all with Indeed. Find top talent fast with Indeed's suite of powerful hiring tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews. Indeed makes it so much easier. That is why I love Indeed. Indeed knows when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. That's why Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must have requirements. Indeed knows hiring needs to be cost effective when you're running your own business. Indeed knows what you're doing, everything for your company. You can't afford to overspend on hiring. So visit indeed.com/locked on to start hiring now. Just go to indeed.com/locked on. Indeed.com/locked on. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Do it today. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So if there is an insider of the insider, it is Elliot Friedman and also Jeff Merrick on the Big Name 32 Thoughts podcast. If you're not a listener, you really should be, as Elliot Friedman is pretty much, I'm going to say, like the Adam Schefter of the NHL. And he is plugged in. He hears all the rumors, all the possibilities of what could be. And there is some word that there could be a potential trade partner in the Columbus Blue Jackets. And what player got scratched tonight? Evgeny Kuznetsov. Is there any possibility that Kuzy could be part of a big trade? Is there another team out there that is looking to jumpstart their offense? Let's face it, the Columbus Blue Jackets, have not lived up to potential. I know that they, a few games ago were playing a little bit better, but it's been kind of a bumpy ride. Suffice as to say for the Columbus Blue Jackets. And could there potentially be a trade partner? If the offseason and the Caps GM Brian McClellan said he would like to add a top six forward to help bolster the scoring on the Caps, Evgeny Kuznetsov has had a slow start to the season, now finds himself being scratched. That was a big thing, like I talked about in the first. And per Sportsnet's Elliot Friedman on the 32 Thoughts podcast, Washington is one of the teams that has been around Columbus on the trade front. Who could they possibly want to trade? I mean, there's two players that come to mind. Evgeny Kuznetsov kind of just pops out, just, based on the fact that he was scratched tonight. Anthony Mantha, I still think they kind of want to move him. Everyone's like, well, why would they move him? Well, because now his value has actually increased, that they could get some kind of return. Because if they let his contract go all the way to the end, he walks, we get nothing. So it is an interesting thing. So I was listening to NHL Network Radio and I heard a name circulated. I also saw Sammy Silver post this. Is there the possibility that the Capitals would be interested in someone like Patrick Laine? That is an intriguing name, a guy that has found himself scratched as well. So would that be a possibility? Patrick Laine doesn't appear to be a good fit and also has found himself scratched in Columbus. Would he be the top six forward the Caps are looking for? And then there's the possibility, that the Capitals, they hung on to Evgeny Kuznetsov with hopes that, that Spencer Carbery was going to be the Kuzy whisperer and that he was going to be able to turn around his career. And we are still, somewhat early in the season, all things considered, about the quarter-way point of the season, and he has struggled. And is there any belief that it's going to turn around? Peter Laviolette tried diligently, I think, to try to make it work, but he is kind of a no-nonsense guy, and I think that, he didn't have necessarily a really great rapport with Evgeny Kuznetsov. And you thought, Spencer Carbery is going to come here, this young guy, he's probably going to work with him really well. Doesn't seem to be the case. And I don't know if it's necessarily a disconnect between Spencer Carbery and Kuznetsov, or if it's just like a lot of the other players on the Capitals, they're just having a hard time finding their way. An interesting thing to think about is I think that his reputation precedes him. For example, do you see a scenario or anything out there where if Ovechkin did the exact same things that Kuznetsov did, that he would be a healthy scratch? Could you imagine Alex Ovechkin being a healthy scratch? So again, I think that part of it is just his history. I think that Spencer Carbery knows Evgeny Kuznetsov's history. He knows how he's played this year. And I think that it's easy to kind of just say, hey, we're going to sit you down. But if it was someone like a TJ Oshie, or if it was someone like an Alex Ovechkin that did similar things, because let's face it, Alex Ovechkin is off to a slow start. TJ Oshie is off to a slow start. There are quite a few players on the Caps that are not what they've been in previous years. Why Evgeny Kuznetsov? Why did he get scratched? Or is this going to be something that's bigger? Is there the possibility in the future that something crazy could happen if, say, we're 10, 15 games from now and Ovi scored only, 2 or 3 more goals? Does he have to worry? I ultimately don't think that's the case, as he is the captain of the team, but it is interesting. And I think what I'm getting at here is that his history is kind of speaking a lot about his present and potentially his future, just based on the fact that he got scratched. So I don't want to read into it anything more than I think I'm just going to take Spencer Carbery at his word that it's going to be this mental reset and hope that he comes back and everything is going to be a-okay. Again, like I talked about off the top of the first show, he just doesn't strike me as the kind of guy that deals too well with tough love. You're going to scratch me. Okay, then I am not going to play that well for you. So it is an interesting position that the Capitals find themselves in here. But would there be a potential option for Patrick Laine? And in the following segment here, I'll go into a little bit more of the specifics on what kind of player Laine is. But it is a player that I believe that the Columbus Blue Jackets would entertain moving. And Kuznetsov is a player I think that the Capitals would entertain moving. Is it a good match? Is it an upgrade? Patrick Laine is a big name, but is he the name that they're looking for? If he, in fact, is also a guy that was scratched in Columbus, is he an improvement or is it just an even trade? So interesting fodder for things to talk about as we talk about wanting to improve the top six, wanting to get more goal scoring. As so far on the team, it's been primarily Strome and Wilson, and that kind of thing. You've seen flashes of greatness from Connor McMichael, picking up some really sweet goals. You've seen Protas. You've seen a lot of the young guys kind of step up, but I'm talking about sustained goalie, scoring goals on a night in, night out basis. Not a goal here, a goal there. We're talking about players on this team that can score goals on the regular. And I think that that's ultimately what they're looking for. And I think that Brian McClellan has done what he can do to try to address that. It's just that it doesn't seem like there's a real opportunity. So that is what kind of is the impetus for this whole conversation. And Patrick Laine is, I think that Laine and Columbus want out and Kuzy and the Capitals want out. Maybe they could meet in the middle. Maybe it would be an upgrade. In the next segment, I will talk to you about that. Is Patrick Laine an upgrade? What kind of player is he if you're not too familiar with him? I'll talk about him coming up. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big sporting event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And now that Christmas is coming, it has been even the best time ever to use Game Time right now with killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guess out of buying tickets. And one of the things that's stressful for me is when I hear my favorite band is coming to town or I'm going to see my favorite team and I'm looking for tickets and I can't find them. Game Time is the perfect solution. It makes watching and getting the tickets that much more easy. And again, now that Christmas is right around the corner, there's no better time than to take advantage of the great offers from Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So that was the word today. The big news surrounding the Capitals was the fact that we know that they lost to Vegas. They're taking on the Coyotes, but not just that, it is that Kuznetsov was benched, and he was benched in the last game and is a healthy scratch tonight. What, if anything, should we read into it? And the biggest name circulating out there, again, I heard this on NHL Network Radio. More locally, I heard Sammy Silver talk about it. Would Patrick Laine be a good option for the Capitals to help address what ails them in the goal scoring department, if you take a look at it? So he is a right wing, drafted second overall by the Jets. But then the thing of concern is that Laine was scratched for the first time in his NHL career as the Blue Jackets concluded a road back-to-back against the Flyers that began Saturday with a gut-wrenching loss to the Capitals for the eighth straight loss. This was a while ago here. But talking about the head coach, Pascal Vincent, he said, "I'm the only one that knows Patrick the most." He said, "Prior to the game, I know Patrick the person, and I know 29 the player. If it makes sense, and I know what he can do on ice, I know his potential. And right now, I think that Patty needs to take a deep breath, go back to working, getting back into the lab, get his touches back, get his shot back, get his confidence back to where it needs to be, so that number 29, Patrick Laine, can return the Patrick Laine we know him to be." So not, just necessarily a real glowing comment about Patrick Laine. It seems like he is struggling to find his way as well. So that is, it is a big name. I'm a fan of the NHL at large as well. And of course, that is a name that I am familiar with. But again, I want an improvement. I don't want, like a meh. Yeah, he's going to be a little bit better. I don't want a little bit better. I want a lot better. And ultimately, is he going to be that upgrade that the Capitals are looking for? So, taking a look at his goals in this season so far, the 23-24 season, in 16 games played, he has 5 goals in 2 assists. So it doesn't necessarily pop off the page, but let's kind of rewind the tape a little bit. In the 22-23 season in 55 games, 22 goals, 30 assists. The 21-22 season in 56 games, 26 goals and 30 assists. So he does have the ability to score goals. It's just I don't know if, they don't have the right supporting players with them in Columbus this year. Maybe it's not the right coaches. Maybe there's just something a bit off with him, but he got his start with the Winnipeg Jets and really started off of just all kinds of production. Just taking a look briefly at his history in the 16-17 season in 73 games, 36 goals, 28 assists, and the high water mark for Patrick Laine was in the 17-18 season in 82 games, 44 goals, 26 assists. So, you take a look at him, I think that there is a lot of raw potential there, but ultimately, is he going to be a good fit? I don't, necessarily think that he is exactly what Brian McClellan was talking about when he said that he wanted a top 6 forward that's going to help, in their goal scoring push. Potentially, I don't know how much money the Capitals are looking to spend on someone like that. We know that Patch Reddy is going to come back. He's a question mark. Would we want to add another question mark with a player that's also struggling with his current team? Again, it's a big name, and for that, it's like, wow, Patrick Laine on the Capitals. That would be pretty cool. I just don't necessarily know if he is the right guy for the job. But let's take a look at his scouting report. Let's rewind the tape here and look at Patrick Laine. What did they see in him when they drafted him? They said a natural scorer. Laine's greatest asset is his intimidating shot. He's not a speedy skater, but possesses power and a long stride and protects the puck well with large frame and a longer stick. Overall, skating has been a minor issue through Laine's development, but has improved with some help from his ability to read the game. Laine has the hunger to create chances on his own from the wing and actively looks for and creates opportunities to use his shot. His elite wrist shot is notable for its quick release, and his powerful one-timer from the top of the circle is a constant threat on the man advantage. This was back from 2016 in eliteprospects.com. So, historically, he has been a really great player. Again, I don't know what's going on with him in Columbus this year. Yeah, but I don't think, it's not a real apple for apple comparison when you take a look at Laine and Kuznetsov. Kuznetsov has had a bumpy ride pretty much for his entire career with the Capitals. He's had really great seasons and he's had really poor seasons. And if you take a look at Patrick Laine's career kind of in total, if I'm going to generalize it, it's been pretty good, all things considered. There's been a couple off seasons, but all things considered, Patrick Laine has been a pretty good player. It's just a mess on that team. Johnny Gaudreau, Johnny Hockey for the Columbus Blue Jackets, he was also a scratch in a game. So I just think that, I think they're slowly finding their way in Columbus, but they're having a difficult time. And I think that they are trying to improve their team. And the Capitals don't want to make any big moves. I think that all things considered, the Capitals are pretty well overall happy with their team. There's things I think, of course, they would like to fix. But I don't think that they want to, make a move that's going to come back and bite them in the butt. Like we traded Kuznetsov for Patrick Laine, and oof, boy, wasn't that a mistake. Those are the kind of things that the Capitals would like to avoid. But it does seem promising that there is the trade, winds swirling out there. Is the possibility out there that the Capitals could land a big fish to help take them over the top? I really hope so. Listen, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on a daily basis. You are what makes this show successful. Again, I'll have the complete game breakdown tomorrow, as it is a late game tonight. That is why I'm talking about all this Kuzy news. I love it. So Thank you so much for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals. And when you're done here, make sure and head on over to the Locked On's 24/7 streaming channel. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.